Okay, so we're live. Fantastic. Welcome, everyone. I know there was a huge sign up for the session, and we do have some new people. So let me do a very brief intro of this series. So we've been running the seminar series from CTEL, which is my center at UCL, since I think last summer was when we started. And this is session 13, if I remember correctly. We somehow managed to have 13 within whatever it was, 8 months or whatever. It's called EconTEAching because this is about time to have a cuppa here in London. Trying to be a little bit cute here. And, you know, this is kind of a continuation of the CTEL Economics Education seminar series that we've had. Our sessions are always quite informal, so it's more of a chat than really a seminar presentation. And the idea is to highlight best practice in teaching and also research in economics education. So this series was started with CTEL working in together with Warwick. So me, my colleague Cloda, who's over there. Cloda, want to give us a wave? And Steffi Paredes from Warwick, and I can't find Steffi anymore. There she is. Thank you everyone for coming. And also, if I can do a really quick pitch for the TEAching conference, deadline is on February 1st. I'll put a link into the chat. If you've done something interesting, you just want to tell us about it. Again, very chill kind of a conference, but obviously if you have a research paper already, that would be great also. Submission deadline coming up, it's in June, it's on Zoom, it's free, all good stuff. So please do submit a proposal. All right, so today our session is on engaging students in large cohorts. And I'm thrilled to be joined by two people who I'm always in complete awe of, because they teach super large groups, super sort of economicsy or techie stuff that you know, is challenging in the best of cases. But this year in particular, with not a huge amount of time or preparation, had to obviously go online, go hybrid, sort of all kinds of different things, lots of uncertainty involved in that as well. So the way we're going to run the session is I'll introduce them. They'll tell us a little bit about the context of where they are, what they teach, how they teach, kind of thing. And then we'll jump straight into some of the questions that have come in. If you have a question, obviously drop them into the chat. We have a chat chair, my colleague Ramin, who's over there. Ramin, give us a wave. And he will sort of gather them up and feed them to me. All right, so without further ado, I'm very happy to introduce my colleague from UCL, Nikhila Tinkani, and James Tierney from Penn State, who is now a colleague because we've worked on different things, not actually in the same university for a while now. So James, can I just start with you? Can you tell us a little bit about your sort of context, where you teach, how many people you teach, what you teach, and what it sort of looks like in normal times?
Sure. So my name is James Tierney over here at Penn State. Pronouns are he, him, and I have been now at Penn State. This is my full 7th year. Usually I'm in large lectures for intro and intermediate macro, about 350 students for intro to macro, and usually around 200, 250 for intermediate macro. And last March, like probably everybody on this call, including my few colleagues that are on this call here at Penn State, we went completely virtual, you know, learned on a Wednesday of spring break that we would have 4 days to switch everything virtual and get back on Monday. Our university wasn't one of those that, you know, gave us a week. I know some schools were like, we'll give you another week to prepare. They were just like, nope, let's go. So we went, and the spring was fun times, to say the least. Had some time in the summer. Fall was a little better, and now I feel like I'm really hitting my stride right as soon as we'll get back to in-person next semester, which is probably the experience of a lot of people. So I'm excited to talk with all of you about what I have done, what I've learned, and yeah, that's my dig right now.
Great, thanks a lot, James. So over to you, Nikhila. So sort of what do you teach? What are the sort of in normal times, what are the parameters?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Nikhila Tinkani. I'm at UCL, and I'm teaching statistical method in economics. As you can see, this is the background that I use for teaching. In normal times, I have between 200 and 300 students, but this year we've had over 600 students. So this year has been very different. Unlike James, I had more time to prepare because I didn't start teaching until the fall. And so we had the whole summer to think about what we were going to do. And I think I benefited tremendously from having a lot of time for preparing. And yeah, I've been teaching this course for, I think, six years now. And yeah, I'm excited about chatting about what I've learned last term.
Okay, great. So just staying with you, Nikhila, can you tell us, sort of jump straight into sort of how did you change your class? What were specific activities, technologies, whatever it is? There were a few questions about specific sort of interactive things like think, pair, share, or clicker activities or things like that. Can you give us a quick overview of how you change either structure, content, whatever it is in the course?
Yes. So, well, the structure changed tremendously. The content, not so much. So it used to be a standard, I would go have a lecture, and then we had some practicals, and then have some teaching assistants who were doing the tutorials. So that's quite standard. So this year that changed completely. So the course was structured into synchronous and asynchronous activities, and all of the core material was delivered synchronously. So what that means is that I broke up each lecture into 3 subparts, and each part is a video. So 3 videos, the videos are between 15 and 20 minutes each. And these were made available to the students ahead of time. Almost, I think by week 2, all of the content was available to the students. And then every week, in place of the lecture, what would normally be a lecture, I did live sessions, sometimes by myself, sometimes with my lead teaching assistant. Sometimes he led some of the live sessions on his own. And during these live sessions, the objective was to, they built on the material that was in the asynchronous videos. So the students had to watch the videos before coming to class. And the first part of the live sessions was always a poll, and I used Mentimeter. So it was a Mentimeter poll where I quizzed them on material covered in the pre-recorded videos. And then in the second part of the live session, I solved an exercise. Typically, what I did was at the beginning of the year, I collected data among my students. So I teach statistics, so that maybe, it's easy in statistics. It's very useful for statistics. So I collected data among the students. They filled out a survey. And then I built a number of exercises along the data. So using the data, describing the data, trying to, solve various exercises. And a feature of the live sessions is that they were always as interactive as possible, as interactive as you can with 600 students. And I'm happy to delve more into that if there are specific questions about it. Another thing I did actually was, so I had a set of 6 or 7 teaching assistants. I was very lucky to have so many teaching assistants. And well, first of all, you're basically leading a team, so it's good to be very organized and be able to communicate with them efficiently. So I set up like a Microsoft Teams group to interact with them. But another thing I did was I asked some of my TAs to pre-record the material that they would teach during their tutorial, so that if some students were unable to attend the tutorials, they could watch the pre-recording material. And that was uploaded after the tutorials. So that was material that was also available to the students.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. And we might come back afterwards for sort of incentives for students and, assessment design and things like that. James, can we ask you the same question? I seem to remember from our discussions over the summer that you are a fan of asynchronous teaching as well.
Yeah, for sure. So, but I could talk about a lot of stuff. And the first thing I want is, because the chat's not hot right now, and this is how I start each one of my synchronous classes. I'll talk about the difference between asynchronous and synchronous. Is I usually ask some sort of question. So in the chat, this is my favorite one to ask. I want you to put something that's not interesting about yourself in the chat, because we always get asked like to do an interesting fact. Give me a fact that's not interesting. So like, for example, in the chat, I would put, I hate onions, because that's a fact about me, but it's not interesting at all. So if I could have you in the chat, put something about yourself that's not interesting. So like, what is something about you that's not interesting? Go ahead and put that in the chat for me. Her name has black hair. Claudia wears glasses. They're not interesting facts at all about you. Michaela, your phone broke last weekend. That's kind of interesting, but it's not that interesting. All right, so I speak English. I get a lot of those from my students. I get things that are like, I'm in economics class right now, like things that are super. But this kind of just gets students at the very beginning, laughing, which I'm a big proponent of comedy and laughter and getting people to open up and be more vulnerable in the learning. That I'm not unrelated. I like that. I'm chilly. I love it. Own a computer. Very much, very much. But also it gets them more comfortable with using the chat function. Even though they've used it before, sometimes, like as you might have noticed in this session, if only the person or someone who's been introduced at the beginning of a session has posted anything in the chat, and it's like, then it's like, okay, well, is this a area that's comfortable to use the chat? Is it not? Because like if we were in person, I wouldn't be like just randomly talking. So I kind of get that going at the beginning. I like pizza. I like pizza as well. So it's Cleveland. We have some people from Cleveland. That's interesting. Oh, from YouTube. Someone said my hair from YouTube. That's a fact. So I do that. And you're right. I have my class set up in the ability that a student could take my class, both of them, either asynchronously or participate in almost a completely flipped classroom. So both my intro and intermediate macro classes are exactly the same. I had a bit of a head start. Because I've been developing Penn State World Campus, which is our online program. I've been developing the intermediate macro course since August of 2019. And we finally just finished it like 2 weeks ago. So I had a little bit of background in the research on online courses and the asynchronous nature of it and the pros and cons. So I tried to take what I felt were the best portions of that I learned, and then add in some other interactive stuff that would be able to benefit students that did want to meet synchronously. The way I have it set up, and I can show my screen at some point for my LMS, for my Canvas page, is all of the material that I would be lecturing on is posted, but it's not posted in like, here's 45 minutes of a video. It's a lot of text and then embedded Fred graphs or, data from, World Health Organization or whatever kind of sparsed in. And then if there's something that I would do on the whiteboard or on a dot cam, calculating GDP, calculating the unemployment rate, that would be a much shorter video. For my intro level class, those were filmed in the studio at Penn State. There's a lightboard studio. So you kind of like write on the mirror in front of you, those types of videos. And so all that information per week is posted on the LMS. In class, we still meet twice a week in class for our class time, but it is a completely review session type atmosphere where I go in and I say, okay, here's the material that I expected you to read and watch and understand. Okay, for the first 10 minutes, I just want you in the chat to write any questions you have, anything that wasn't that you weren't comfortable with, let's go over it. And then I'll get a bunch of students that'll be like, so this week we're going over GDP. So, I don't understand why we don't include intermediate goods. So then I'll write that down on the iPad. Or why is the GDP deflator 100 in the base year? So I'll write that down. And then we go in and we do those questions together. And it's more focused on what are the issues that they are actually having. There's pros and cons of all this, of course. It has worked well for me and for my students. My fall semester, my teaching evals and my overall GPA distributions were right in line as where they were before. So I don't do as much clicker stuff or breakout rooms or any of that. But I don't think those are bad ideas. I think everyone has their own way, and I would love to hear about that too.
Excellent. Thank you very much, James. I think there was a question that was submitted earlier. Well, there were a couple of questions which are kind of related. First, focusing on sort of tech-related challenges. So either from your side, and it's really nice to hear that you have a studio with light boards, and I know Econ Twitter got very excited about light boards, which I found was sometimes counterproductive because it can scare people who don't have those things into thinking that they need the fancy tech. I have to say that I have an old style visualizer thing, which I write under, and that seems fine. But I guess from the point of view of students, so either connectivity issues, or obviously it's less for the asynchronous stuff, but perhaps for that as well. Or for students with disabilities, or students in different time zones. So James, first of all, did you face any of those problems? If so, how did you handle them?
Sure, which is one of the main reasons why I wanted to have an asynchronous component, even though our university was pushing us completely away from asynchronous for reasons that I understand, money-wise. But I do have students that are taking the course from all over the globe. And so I want them to be able to, participate in it in a way that is still beneficial for them. I also have students that don't have great technology when it comes to certain things. So I've tried to work with them when it comes to submitting assignments and anything. But at the end of the day, like I have had a couple of students that have said, I use my econ lab through Pearson, and they're like, I have to connect through a VPN, and it's really not working that well. So can I have some extra time? And, I then go in and I notice that they've only accessed the Canvas material that day. And so is it the VPN? Is it the connection? And so this semester, up front, the first week, I said, hey, the other section of this class doesn't have as many assessments as I do, and they are not as timed. So if you have any issues with technology and you don't think that you'll be able to connect for a timed assessment, I'm going to ask you to please switch into the other section. And that worked well. I've only had like 1 or 2 students out of the 500 of my 2 classes that have said they've had any connection issues for the quizzes, and I've just dealt with those on a one-on-one basis. But I think the having the asynchronous has helped kind of get around most of those issues.
That's really interesting to hear. And I know that UCL at the beginning of the academic year invested in something called, I think it's called China Connect or something, which is a server that students can connect directly through, mostly for China, so that they can get to like YouTube and things like that wouldn't be available otherwise. And I guess we'll hear at some point how successful that was. But of our 800 first-year students, we haven't heard many complaints. So I'm guessing it's working, or they've found a workaround or something. How about you, Nikhila? Did you have either on your side or on the student side issues with either the technology, time zones, anything else kind of connecting to or linking up to your material?
So not really. So regarding the time zones, it was useful to survey the students at the start of class to get an idea of where they were geographically. And that's when I realized that we had almost no one west of London. The problem was east. So there were many people in China, for example. And so when we decided when to schedule our office hours, mine and the TAs. So I insisted that they would be in the morning, the latest would be at lunchtime, so that it was not too late for those east of London. I was completely acceptable for those around here. And, you know, there weren't any issues. So something I think is important. It's important for the students to understand that it's very easy to contact you. This is feedback I got from the students, that they said, well, I like how easy it is to get in touch with you. They had many ways of getting in touch with me. So they knew that, you know, if someone couldn't make it, though if there were 2 people in the Americas, you know, they knew that they could have gotten in touch with me, and I could have had, you know, special office hours with them. So I think it's important to get a sense. It's helpful to get a sense of where your students are by serving them. That's, I think, with today's technology, it's very easy. The exams were online quizzes, and I think we had like 1 or 2 problems that people had connection issues, and you treat them on a one-on-one basis. So you go into the attempt and you check. So that wasn't a big problem. And then in general, to kind of hedge against it, you know, all the live activities were saved. So all the core material was asynchronously given. So I agree with James, that's a great advantage. So I knew that they weren't missing anything important, and all the synchronous activities are also available to them afterwards. So in the end, there were no issues really.
So if I can just ask a follow-up question on that, Nikhila. So you mentioned about sort of students getting in touch with you. And I remember that one of your successes ended up being kind of problematic because the discussion forums were very active. So do you want to tell us a little bit about sort of what you were trying to achieve with the discussion forums and sort of what happened there?
Yeah, so the discussion forum, I now have mixed feelings about it. So the students could, so there was a clear link to my Zoom office hours, and they knew my email address. So they knew they could contact me if they couldn't make it at office hours, and I did do some extra office hours by appointment. Then, you know, they could contact, equally easy to contact the teaching assistants, but then we had this forum. So the forum for me initially, what I wanted to achieve initially was, that's a forum for students to discuss. And one of the teaching assistants and me are going to regularly monitor it to make sure that there's no mistakes when they answer each other's questions. What ended up happening was that every day, either me or my lead teaching assistant were checking the forum. What ended up happening is that a few students used it as additional office hour. And so we always got the same set of, say, 5 to 10 students out of over 600 who asked a lot of questions. And oftentimes they were the kind of questions that it's much easier to cover them during an office hour. And students were not contributing to any of the conversations. So it ended up being a very inefficient way for my TA and me to give them feedback. It was quite taxing for us, and I'm not sure the benefit was there. One thing I noticed is that they kept, sometimes the same question came up, so that told me they weren't reading through the forum. So yeah, I have mixed feelings about the forum. I didn't achieve what I initially wanted to achieve.
That's really interesting. And, you know, we'll come back to talk about sort of more about students sort of peer-to-peer interaction as well. But if I can turn to James to also ask sort of how you interacted with the students sort of on a regular basis. So you said that if they had problems, obviously they got in touch, but just, you know, what kind of regular interactivities? And I see that you have a visitor as well in the background.
Yeah, my dog child, she is great unless there is a delivery truck outside, and I'm like, okay, as long mail usually doesn't come till afternoon, but I guess something just dropped off, but she should be good now. How do I students? So that is something that I'm trying to do a lot more this semester, and I've been using mail merge and with using Microsoft. So Penn State, we are completely like Outlook, Excel, Word. And I've been for like a year being like, I'm going to learn how to do a mail merge. And I thought it was going to be a lot harder than it is. And then I found a 7-minute YouTube video that like walked me through step by step exactly how to do a super cool mail merge. So this semester, what I've already done is taken a couple of moments. It doesn't take that long to like emailed everyone that took our first quiz and got less than a 70% because it's just on the syllabus and on like a couple of, local ordinances for COVID that I make them read. And so the average is a 90% on the first quiz. And so anyone who got less than a 70, I sent them an email, but usually in the past, I would just send a broad email that's like, hello, I noticed you didn't score well, please reach out. So with the mail merge, I was able to be like, hi, Michelle, I've noticed that you got a 62.5% on your first quiz, which was, 25 percentage points below the average. And so I've tried to make it as personalized as possible. And I got so much more feedback from students that are like, oh, the reason why I didn't do well is because of this, because of that. So that was some way that's something I'm trying to do more of this semester, of reaching out to students that are struggling early on to try and identify and do like early interventions. I also send out a pre-semester survey through Google Forms, provide a couple of points on a quiz for them to complete that. And I keep adding more and more things that I ask. So I ask for what's their preferred name, because a lot of times I'll have students, international students that might want to go by Steven or something. So like, what's your preferred name? Is it Joe or is it Joseph? I ask for pronouns. I ask for what is your major? When do you plan on graduating? This semester, I asked if you have a scheduler. So I said, okay, do you put your events down into a schedule, like some sort of calendar, like Google Calendars or your own planner? And gave them some options of like, yes, I use one every day for everything. Yes, but I only use it for important meetings. Yes, I have one, but I hardly ever use it. No, I've never used one. And I've reached out to everyone that says, no, I've never used a scheduler, and basically said, you need to get a calendar to know when things are due. Lastly, in that pre-survey, I asked them, do you have any questions about economics at this point? And then I said, is there anything about me as a person you'd be interested in knowing? And then I took all those responses and wrote like a big article of like, how'd you get involved in econ? Why are you a Mets fan? How did you get started with improv? And just kind of answered them all out, like took like an hour on Saturday and just answered them all out and just posted up online and sent them all a link. And so trying to like get as a closer to the students. And now I always have those two surveys for both of my classes. So if a student comes to office hours, I can look up and I can be like, oh, so I see you're an accounting major. Like, why'd you decide to be accounting? And it allows me to have a little more connection with students. I've been doing this for a few years just because large lectures, like haven't been able to get in touch with as many students as I used to when I taught like 40 students. And it's just kind of amped up a little when it comes to the virtual setting. So those are just a couple of things that I do.
That's really interesting. I think the mail merge, the power of the mail merge, it's an old tech, right? But it's easy to underestimate the power of a mail merge. So can I just ask, sort of following on from that? So that's obviously about you interacting with the students and getting back to them. How about sort of community building within the students? So something like, the example that I keep getting from both students and other practitioners is, the casual chats that you strike up when you're coming into the classroom or going out of the classroom. That's what's missing, right? Mm-hmm. So this is not really a course specific or module specific thing. It is more a program or university specific thing. But were there any things that you did in your classroom or what were being done in the department or something like that to build community?
So I know that Jadrian Wooten, who I think is hanging out somewhere, he along with Wayne Geerling have written up some stuff about doing social things and like study buddy type things. I haven't done any of that, but I know that their stuff is great. What I have been doing. So there's three things. One, I always open up the class 15 minutes early, and I play music through Spotify that goes through my microphone. and I invite students to join early and like request songs and feel free to chat in the chat box beforehand. That's people show up, but they don't really say a lot of things. So I might try and figure out a way to get that more. The second one, which I just started this semester, is I'm staying after class for 10 minutes on Zoom. Last semester, as soon as it was done, I'm out of here, y'all. Like, I want to go. So this semester I stayed on. Like yesterday for my intro class, I had like 8 students that stayed after and wanted to talk about why GameStop was up 400% in the stock market, right? And so, I had done a little bit of research on it from Twitter. And so I knew, but I'm like, look, guys, this is a finance thing. This is an econ, but let's chat about it. So like they kind of connected and they're like, I'm on Robinhood, this and that. And was able to tie it to econ saying, through this pandemic, people with money have actually saved a lot of money because we're not traveling, we're not doing this, we're not doing that. So where are they putting this money? And a lot of them are making bets in the stock market. So we had fun conversations. The third thing is I've been using for over a year now is PackBack. It's an AI-based kind of discussion board that has students ask questions and they have to put sources. And I almost got rid of it because I wasn't sure how students were, what they felt, because the grades were fine and it looked fine, but I went back to my entrepreneurial spirit and I said, well, what did I do if I'm running a business? Well, I'd ask my damn customers, like, what's going on. So I just asked the students, I'm like, anonymously, here's a survey, like, what do you think about this? And I found the majority of students enjoyed the PackBack because their main reason was they were able to keep up with the news. And that's what they really enjoyed about it. They liked forcing themselves and also reading like what's on the Wall Street Journal or the Economist or any of this type of stuff. So I ended up keeping it. And that has provided some community. But it's definitely not as good as, like you said, in person, walking around, having people having conversations. So I am looking for ways to increase that.
That's great. One of the things I was thinking, and I came up in a chat question as well, was both of you are sort of award-winning educators, right? So you perhaps have the confidence to do things that others might not. So I'm just thinking, James, going back to this, staying after class and students ask some random thing about some very specific, stock or whatever. It takes some confidence, right? To kind of wing it, figure out, okay, how can I turn this around to make it something that's useful and so on. Would you have any sort of guidance or advice for someone who's used to doing it traditionally? I mean, economics, right? At least you prepare your lecture, right? You have your slides, you know what you're going to say. It's not very interactive. They're coming from that kind of perspective. Would you have any advice for them?
It definitely takes time and practice of kind of putting yourself out there and being vulnerable, and it can 100% be scary. I remember like when I first started teaching, I was so nervous that a student would ask me a question that I didn't know, that I would kind of steer away from topics that I wasn't a 100% expert in. And that really limited my ability to educate in my personal mind. And so I don't know, it just kind of came about, and probably at a conference like this where someone said, it's okay to say you don't know. Like, it's okay to be like, that's not what I'm an expert in. And that kind of opened me up to be a little more improvisational and be able to go off topic. If someone's like, hey, I'm from Venezuela, and, I was wondering if we could talk a little bit today about the inflation crisis. And early in my career, I would be like, well, I don't really know much about that, but, so maybe you could look at this, and I would kind of dismiss it, which I think will put that student in like, oh, well, I guess my question's not important. Whereas now more of an improvisational, like yes and type thing, like, oh yeah, like, I've read about that. And did you know that they accept dollars now a lot more than they do Bolivar? And like, even if I just know a little bit, then it helps them. And then if they ask a follow-up question, I don't know, I'll be like, what, I don't know about that, but let me check it and let me, email me about it. And that has helped me out a lot. Of course, I'm a big proponent of taking a theater or an improv class in town, like find something to get you out of your comfort zone. Remember, your students asking questions are probably out of their comfort zone. So it's good to kind of feel that way. And I've been trying to be the last couple of years a lot more compassionate and a lot more open with my students, being like, some of this stuff is really tough for me too. And I'm not going to know everything. And like, let's kind of have this experience together. And it's worked well for me. I do know, obviously, that there's different experiences if you're if you're a female instructor, or if you're a much younger instructor, a much older instructor, or a person of color, or an underrepresented minority. Like, everyone has their own issues when it comes to how they present themselves in the classroom. So I do want that advice to be taken with that grain of salt.
I should add here that James does do improv, so he has form here, and James, feel free to drop your YouTube channel link on there as well. Nikhila, so I know that you also stayed behind, or you had your office hours right after the live session. Yeah. Is that right? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so sometimes they were right after the session and sometimes they weren't. When they were right after the session, it turned out to be just an hour of open questions on anything that was covered up until that point. And I remember the 2 office hours before the exams, at some point I joked and I said, guys, it feels like I'm being quizzed, because they asked me everything that had been covered. And it was very liberating for me to do it. I had never done anything like that before, but it just happened. I didn't anticipate that office hours after the lecture, in hindsight, I should have, would turn into these sessions, open-ended sessions. It was very liberating because I realized that there's really nothing to fear. First of all, like 99% of the times, you know the answer. And second of all, if you don't know, it's fine. You can just say, okay, look, I need to look this up. Or you can ask another question so that the student can start answering the question themselves. But it was very liberating because I was terrified before doing it. And then I did it and I was like, well, actually, it's not so bad. So in next years, I actually plan to have my 2-hour lecture be 1 hour of structured material that builds on, I will keep my pre-recorded videos, and then there will be like 1 hour of pre-structured material, and then 1 hour of you ask me what you want to talk about, and we improvise. It was incredibly interactive in the end.
Can I just ask, because I think your enrollment was like, what, almost 700, right? How chaotic this was? Did you just have people, the office hours themselves? Did people just come in and raise their hand and ask questions, or how exactly did you run it?
Mostly they joined at the beginning and they stayed. So for the first 5 to 10 minutes of the office hours, I had the constant ping of people joining, but then they just stayed for the whole hour. I had about 60, 70 people. So about 10% joined every time. And I asked them to raise their hand and then I called them out. That's how I did it. And it was orderly, it was clear, but it was also interactive, and sometimes the questions built on each other. So it was a positive experience for everyone, I think.
That's really great. And I have to say that, kudos to you for having the courage to, especially the first time, right? Somewhere in the back of your mind, it must have thought, what if 600 people start talking all at once, or some kind of chaos happens, right? But I'm really glad that it worked out. There's a question for you, Nikhila, about, you said earlier that you had all your async material available early in term. Did you feel that meant that some students were going at a completely different pace than others? Was there any sort of issues with where the students were, how you could support them, whether they were kind of, learning in the way you wanted to lead them through the term because of that?
So no, I think that there weren't any issues. I don't know, maybe the question is, did someone just start binge watching all the videos and then ask questions? That didn't happen. To the contrary, normally in my teaching evaluations, something that came often was that sometimes some students thought that the teaching pace was too slow and some students thought it was too fast. Obviously, you have heterogeneous backgrounds. It's bound to happen. There's really nothing you can do. You kind of teach somewhere in the middle. This time, not only no one complained about the pace, but I actually got students telling me how happy they were because they can decide, they can choose their own pace. So my asynchronous videos, I think there's a little bit more material than I normally would have thought, just because I had more time to do it. But I told the students, look, you can watch it on, twice the speed. I don't care. If you think it's too easy for you, just watch it twice the speed. That's totally fine. And then I got people in the chat telling me, oh, yes, I do that. That's fine. And so I think it's great how they can tailor the pace to their own background. And that's really good. And that's something that I will exploit again in future, even after the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I found as well. I think that we have a question asking the pace of the module, and the proportion that I got that said just right was way, way higher than anything before. And I was literally not doing anything that differently other than the structure was flexible, so students could take it at their own pace. So I think that's really interesting. James, just to come back to you on the asynchronous material, did you feel that, I guess the question is, some of the feedback that we've gotten from, we've been hearing from students in various places is, it feels like I'm teaching myself because the content is, asynchronous, obviously. It's obviously not that, but perception, that kind of perception, plus I've been reading quite a lot about perception of workload, just because, when you were in person, you were setting readings and assuming that people read it, and perhaps they didn't. And now, because it's more structured, there's a clear pathway that students should be taking. And so they feel like, the ones who are not doing those things now feel like they have pressure to do it. And therefore it feels like the workload is higher, even though I would assume for both of yours, macro and stats, you kind of have to teach what you have to teach, right? Content is not going to change very much from year to year.
Yeah, so I'll address both of those things. I'll start with the idea of, I feel like I'm teaching myself. Yes, you are. The pedagogical research shows that me standing up there and lecturing to you is not learning. So I would be expecting you to be going over some stuff even if we were in person and I was going there, right? And I've been making that move towards more of a flipped classroom, and hey, you don't need me to stand up here and to tell you that GDP is the monetary value of all final goods and services produced in the United States within 1 year, right? You don't need me to tell you that. That's something that you can consume on your own and digest it, and then come in and ask more questions that may be confusing of what exactly does the value added structure mean. So I've been moving that way. As I've become a more experienced instructor and really kind of leaned into the pedagogical research. So I kind of show that to the students right away. In my first week orientation for intro level, I have them go through different learning science modules to show them different ways, like actual learning and cognitive science, basic research, to kind of convince them. It's a lot of convincing, it's a lot of, here is how learning happens. Here is why I believe I'm doing what I'm doing. And, I do always throw in there, if this isn't the type of class that you're looking for, that's one of the good things about being at a Penn State, is there are other instructors that teach the same course. I kind of always throw that in there. So that's how I deal with it. It's a lot of setting expectations up first. This is what it is. This is what the benefit is. And I will always get a few students that are like, I feel like I'm teaching myself. And I go, okay, well, that's what I want you to do, because this is what we're doing. But I feel like it's well over, I'm seeing much more on the positive side of, oh, that was so great that I was able to do this on my own pace and my own speed, and then come in and ask you for help. And you've been so helpful. The second thing is workload, and I 100% feel you on that, as students felt like this is a lot more. And I got that in my intro class, because I am now giving them 37 quizzes throughout the semester, which ends up being one quiz every Wednesday, one quiz every Friday, and one quiz every other Monday. And so I set it up again for spacing wise, and each of these major quizzes are cumulative. So students don't like that. But again, going back to the learning science and the pedagogical research, and at the end, it super pays off, because their final's cumulative, and then they score heck of a lot better than they used to. So what I had to do and I can even show that later if you want. I emailed out this is what I would do if I was taking your class. And here's a half hour on this day. Here's an hour and a half on this day. Here's this, here's that. Ed said, you don't have to follow this, but I'm telling you, if you follow this, this will be your best path. And, you know, I used to be first day of class, I'm starting GDP material. I'm getting into it. I need my students to know this expectation of like, we are getting into material and this is rah, rah. And now, especially since we've gone virtual, I take the entire first week as an orientation week where I go over the learning science. I go over how the course is going to go. I give them this information, and basically throw it out to them and say, this is what this class is going to be. I want you to come on this journey with me. As cheesy as that sounds, like kind of get them excited about learning and macroeconomics. And I'd say that's the biggest change that I've had as an instructor over the last 2 years. 2 years ago, I would have been like, GDP is cool. Now I want to be like, learning's cool and GDP is cool too.
That's a really great answer. And I was going to say that, you know, one of my frustrations has been, I love your 37 quizzes. I just have a weekly quiz. And one of my frustrations has been here in the UK, where everything is very bureaucratic. Obviously, we keep having these discussions with university admin about over-assessing people. And there's no way you can have a discussion about assessment and, you know, the role it plays in the learning science if you're going to say you can have no more than 2 assessments total, or, you know, whatever it is, right? It has to have a reason. So that's just a frustration we have here. I think you kind of got into it a little bit already, but the final question kind of is around what would you know, the question was that was submitted was more, you know, do you prefer the now world or the pre-COVID world? I think we would all prefer the post-COVID world, but in the post-COVID world, what do you think you would take away from this experience that you would want to replicate if you were free to come back into the classroom, sort of, you know, do anything you wanted?
Is that for me? Okay. Sorry, I'm looking at the chat. I'm going to get back to you about if all 37 quizzes count here in a second. I'll post something. I started writing an article, just like a blog post, like not a research article. I found much more personal joy in writing like 500 to 800 word like blog posts about my teaching experience rather than trying to like get it into a journal. And that's just like a personal preference. I love reading everybody else's stuff in the teaching journals and the literature review. Personally, like I found more joy in kind of getting some stuff out there. And I've started writing one that said, COVID-19 was the kick in the ass I needed to flip my classroom, because I am going to keep this idea that here is next week's material. Here are some videos. Here is some of the stuff that I've written. Here's Wall Street Journal, Financial Times stuff that I want you to read before class on Tuesday. And then instead of me sitting in this room right here with an iPad going over stuff, I'm going to show up and say, okay, everybody, here's a couple worksheets that we're going to do. Here's what questions do you have, and try and really dig into that flipped classroom type of thing. So I'm going to move my assessments for intro for sure. I'm going to move those completely out except for the final. For intermediate, I'm going to bring assessments back in because I want them to be able to do more graphing and more modeling in that sense. But I'll have those as evening exams. I'm still going to use the classroom time as more of a flipped thing. So that's my that's going to be my takeaway, and I'll see how it translates. And I'm just going to be comfortable with it not working, just having a semester like, oh, that didn't work. Let's try something else.
That's a great answer. I think that confidence is something that's absolutely key. Difficult to get, but if you have it, then, you know, things will fail, and that's not the end of the world. That's all okay. Nikhila, same question for you. What would you like to carry over to the post-COVID world, which I have to hope to God will come soon?
Let's hope that. Well, I agree with James. So something I realized is that my time with the students is way more valuable if I'm there to explain their doubts rather than, you know, I'm not saying I was reading out slides, but, you know, some concepts, it's better if they study them on their own time, and then if there's anything they don't understand. So I think what I will keep, so I will keep these pre-recorded videos and the requirement that they watch them before they come to class. And then in class, as I said, there will be some structure. So I plan to do some applications with them, ideally using data on them because students really like that. And then just leave 1 hour, 50 minutes to open-ended questions. I think that's what I'll keep. Yeah, I think the students seemed happy, very happy about the structure of the course. So at least it seems it's something that the students like. It's anecdotal evidence, of course, from teaching evaluations, but looks like they like it.
That's really great. And I think, my experience definitely has been that I sort of tried to second guess myself a little bit. And even though, everything was set up for doing the asynchronous sort of prep for students beforehand, I did at the beginning sort of repeat myself a little bit in the live lectures, just because I thought, are they really going to do it? Sort of not having the confidence in sort of the structure. And then it was interesting that we did weekly feedback and students were just like, we've been over this. It's, we've done this. You asked us to do it, we did it. It's like, okay, then that frees me up to say all kinds of stuff. And yeah, it was a liberating a moment as well. I'm actually really intrigued by this this thing in the chat about, I think Mark Meyer might have said that he asked his students to write a letter to the next cohort of students. And I know that, so Claudia's put it in there, I know that my kids also in school, they have to write a letter to their buddy who's coming into that year next time around about, what to do and advise and stuff like that. I think, especially from this year, all the shocks that have been hit, but maybe for longer also, it would be really cool to do something like that, maybe at a, program level even, not just module or course levels, just, something like this to happen. And I agree with, is it Clodagh that said that this thing, I think one of my biggest takeaways is this kind of setup where I can see everyone's names. I am so bad with names. Literally, I know people, but, and it's really embarrassing where I cannot for the life of me remember what their name is. This would be really nice. So name tags or whatever it is. All right, so not seeing any other questions in the chat that we haven't quite gotten to, I think. Let me have a quick sort of quick look to see what's happening. I think everyone in the UK here will be familiar with this whole over-assessing and people getting involved in other people's courses and this and that and the other. Okay, question from Joe. This is a big one that we've had, I think, for a lot of different people. Have either of you done sessions where you have, it's like Zoom like this, and you've had challenges with having people keep their cameras on? So either of you, whoever wants to.
So last semester I had 0 people for both of my classes keep their cameras on, and I never pushed it just because, it doesn't bother me one way or the other, and I don't want students to feel uncomfortable like they need to. And then this semester for my intro class, there's probably a dozen out of the 180 that show up that will turn it on. And that wasn't prompted, they just have. And I'm like, okay, cool. And I'll comment on like, oh, I see Victoria is laughing. I must, what did I say? Or something like that. I think it's a battle I wasn't willing to fight or put energy into. And that's just me. I didn't see the benefit outweighing the cost of it. I also didn't want any students to feel uncomfortable if they're taking it, with people hanging out in the background, or like, oh man, my house isn't as nice as these other people's houses. So I just kind of said, you know what, that's not a thing that I'm going to worry about. But it doesn't mean it's not good for other people.
Yeah, that makes sense. How about you, Nikhila?
Well, I wasn't using Zoom, and the technology I was using, Echo 360 didn't even give me that option. But I did have a chat, and that was my way of getting some feedback from them. The only times when I asked students to turn their cameras on was during office hours, if it was just me and them.
Yeah.
If it was just the two of us, and I asked as a favor. Otherwise, I never. So another issue is that these lectures are recorded, and so they might not want to have their cameras on if they're recorded. only during the tutorials. The policy was the tutorials are not going to be recorded because we want to make you feel comfortable about turning on your camera. But again, it wasn't a requirement.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the lessons perhaps of sort of the large groups versus small groups as well. And again, you know, I've taught in the first year class as well, where there's 800 people. Even in my final year course, there were 100 people. And I didn't really get that much from having the cameras on because I can't keep track of 100 people and what they're doing in any case. In smaller classes, I can imagine that that would be much more important. If you had 10, 12 people in a, you know, senior seminar kind of thing, that would be much more important. But I did, for example, in breakout rooms or in tutorials or things like that, where it's more sort of personal, that may make sense. We're out of time. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Thank you to James and Nikhila for both their amazing work and also for sharing with us. I can see there's been lots of active learning and teaching in the chat as well. So I'm going to try to catch up with that and see whether what all the good ideas are. Thank you very much, everyone. And I think Claude has already put into the chat the link to the conference as well, February 1st deadline. So if you want to submit something, that would be fantastic. And do keep an eye out for our next seminars.